Hello, everyone. This is Adam Meister, the Bitcoin Meister, the Disrupt Meister. Welcome to part one of the This Week in Bitcoin show. Today is November the 7th, 2019. Yes, it's Thursday. You're getting a sneak peek of Friday's This Week in Bitcoin show. This is the very first part. We'll debut the second part on Friday. We'll show the whole thing eventually. You're getting a sneak peek here on Thursday. So pound that like button. Enjoy this first bit of the This Week in Bitcoin show. See ya. Hello, everyone. This is Adam Meister, the Bitcoin Meister, the Disrupt Meister. Welcome to This Week in Bitcoin. Today is November the 8th, 2019. Strong hand. Bitcoin is the next Bitcoin. In motion. Bitcoin is the apex predator. One Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. I'm offended by selling conviction. And we've got two guys here that got a lot of conviction. They are unique beasts. They are relentless. Oh yeah, David Bennett is coming in. He's got his podcast, Bitcoin and ... And then we got Leo Weiss. He's coming in from freaking Hong Kong, okay? So we're gonna start it off with a little bit of a beyond Bitcoin here. Both of you guys, welcome back to the show. But Leo, tell us the latest in Hong Kong with the protests and the situation with China.
The protests are very much still going on. The heat is on the Hong Kong government and on the Chinese government. It feels a bit like the government is losing its mind. It feels a bit like the police is on the verge of breaking. But at the same time, things have been going on for almost half a year now. So you can imagine people's patience is very, very thin. Everybody's tired. There are very, very little results on both sides so far. Currently, everybody's focusing on the district council election, which is not so much meaningful in a political sense, because the district council, which is kind of like a municipal government, doesn't so much have any power, doesn't really have so much any ability to legislate. But it is very much a referendum on people's faith in the government, on people's satisfaction with the pro-establishment factions. And yeah, the pro-government leagues are expected to lose House High, which is going to blow their credibility wide open. So for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I expect people to mainly focus on these elections and also not too much cause a scene in that nobody wants to really risk those elections being cancelled. Nobody wants to give the government an excuse to call it off, because it is going to be very embarrassing for the Hong Kong government, the Chinese government, the pro-establishment factions, and how just everybody's going to come out and take away their vote of faith.
All right, so no end in sight right now to the situation. David, do you have any questions for Leo about the situation before we move on to crypto Bitcoin stuff?
Yeah, Leo, I'm in the panhandle of Texas, so I'm sitting pretty much square in the middle of the United States, and as of late, I'm not getting hardly any news at all about Hong Kong protests, and it begs me to wonder, even though I won't, but it sort of begs me and probably a lot of other people to wonder, are the protests dying down in size at all, or is it exactly the same as it's been for a while?
I think compared to the peak of the October 1st weekend, so the weekend around the national holiday, when really everybody came out to put pressure on just taking away their precious national holidays and their celebrations. Compared to that, it has died down. But we do have hard data on the last 5 months, right? We do know how many protests there have been. We do know how many tear gas shots have been fired. We do know how many how many Molotov cocktails have been thrown, or how many bank offices have been trashed, or how many MTR stations have been disrupted. And so the hard data tells us that the heat is still on, that the pressure is still on. We have experienced protests change a lot in their nature, where in June, July, most protests would still be allowed by the government. There'd be a sanctioned starting point, end point, protest route. You could neatly count how many people really took part in the protest, and that's become very difficult. So for people to count how many people have participated has become incredibly difficult. I was on the streets last Saturday, and I can tell you that even though there were a massive amount of people around me, I don't really have a good estimate of how many people were total at the scene, because all I can count is the 200 meters in front of me and the 200 meters behind me. And I know that with the given width of the street, and I can roughly imagine like the density, right? So I can, in my head, like make a rough estimate that at that point there were probably 10 to 15,000 people in my field of view, which is very, very small compared to the hundreds of thousands that we've seen verified at previous protests. But then that's just my side of view, right? I don't know how many people were behind the next corner, or how many people were on the other street. So verifying these things has become a lot more difficult. We do know from polling that the trust that people have in the government and the trust that people have in the police is continuing to go down. So even though we already expected the government to hit rock bottom in October or September when it comes to supporters, we see that like falling down even more. But what we don't know, and what we're not able to measure, is how committed these people are to really like taking their government head on. And what I know from personal anecdotes, which again is not is not a hard metric, but it's just personal anecdotes, that my friends are they're considering a move abroad. They're considering to like give up. They're no longer they're afraid of like that this might not be worth the fight, and that they could find a better home in Taiwan or in Canada or the United States or somewhere in Europe.
Well, I've got a question about the feedback that you guys have gotten. If you've gotten a positive vibe from the news, I don't know if you've heard, but since the last time we spoke in the United States, people definitely know more about China than they did before through the NBA, National Basketball Association situation, and through the Uyghurs. That has really become well known now, what China is doing with that ethnic minority in the mainland. Have you guys, gotten the vibe that maybe through your protest you have, informed some people about some broader issues?
I do think that Hong Kong has like a little bit shaken up the world, and that Hong Kong maybe does get disproportionate amount of attention. Maybe Hong Kong being an international city, being a port city, being the Asia Pacific headquarters of a lot of international companies, gets a little bit more attention than maybe like East Turkestan gets, right? Like Xinjiang gets, like where the home of the Uyghurs gets. Yeah. A bit of an ironic side effect is that in the last few years, China has been systematically kicking out journalists out of Beijing, out of Shanghai. They've been denying their visas. They've been like rejecting their publications. And a lot of these journalists found a home in Hong Kong. And a lot of these journalists in Hong Kong are now, giving like the world and the world audience like a very insightful view over what's happening in Hong Kong. And even though I'm very I'm very disheartened to know what's happening to the Uyghurs and to the Hong Kongers and to many other people in China. It is also very encouraging to hear how people, for example, in the United States, are realizing what's going on and are taking a stance themselves. Like we've seen images from especially the gaming community and the basketball community of really standing up and saying like, no, like we have these values and we've been putting these values like pretty much at the front door of our corporations the entire time. But what are these values worth if we're not able to uphold them? in the face of something like the Communist Party of China. And that's actually quite encouraging to see, because the amount of support that Hong Kong has been getting is, yeah, very, very encouraging. And that includes Congress and now Senate of like the Hong Kong Human Rights Act, which a lot of Hong Kongers, even though they might be critical of the United States, very much support, and they do fly U.S. flags in support of that. Even though, of course, they know that the United States might not be like the perfect innocent country that like their critics claim they think it is.
Well, I think the realization is, if the United States wanted to, they could make a big difference in these protests. I mean, if we cut off all trade with China or something drastic like that, it would be a tremendous help.
There is this slogan in the protest movement, and partly I believe it's a motto of the government as well. If we burn, you burn with us. And it's this thought that people of Hong Kong are not going to be willing to just hand over what they've built, hand over their city to the Chinese government, but instead that if the people of Hong Kong are denied their basic rights and their basic like ability to participate in the city, then they're also going to like withdraw their consent and allow and kind of prevent somebody else from getting it, right? And that's a very dangerous viewpoint, partly also because the Chinese Communist Party shares it, in that they also believe that Hong Kong is very important to them, right? They also believe that this is a city that they've built and that they've like grown. But they are as much willing to take that away from the people of Hong Kong rather than to have it hand over to like democratic values or some nebulous idea of freedom, as they think.
Wow, two very stubborn sides battling it out here. All right, Dave.
Well, yeah, it's a stubborn side, right? But if we look at it like this, as like two children fighting, right? Then yeah, both are very stubborn. But on one side, you have the people of Hong Kong who have relatively understandable demands, right? Like all they want is some kind of participation in local governments. They're not asking for independence. They're not asking for the overthrow of the Communist Party. They're not asking to split the country in half. All they want is to elect their own leaders and have like a say in their local politics. And on the other side, you have the government, which is denying them those things, and which is saying that like, if we can't have like our loot in the local economy, if we're not able to like exercise our power and extract the value from that economy, then nobody gets anything. And if you frame it like that, I think it's a little bit clearer that if you have the government on one side and the population on the other side, maybe the population has a more has more of a principled right for their own self-determination.
Yeah, I should have said the word conviction instead of stubborn. Both sides have some conviction there. But I got to say that the Hong Kong side, they're basically just saying, hey, you weren't supposed to really interfere until the year 2047, right? I mean, this is in 2047. Can't you guys wait until 2047 like the agreement said? I mean, so they're definitely on the right side of that there.
Right. It's really not very radical to demand that one side holds up its side of the bargain, right? If one side promises and makes promises in a 50-year-long deal, then it's very much understandable to expect that one side to hold up its side of the bargain.
All right, David, any last questions you have on the situation before we move on to mainland China here?
Well, not really a question as much as something that I've been thinking about since these protests began is that I'm not sure if we fully understand that, you know, Hong Kong has been Hong Kong and separate from China for like, the lease was 99 years. So if you look at a generation being 30 years, you've got 3 generations of people that have grown in a completely different path. They've grown in a completely different way, and biology is strong. And it's not, I'm not talking about physical biology here as much as if you have a whole society as small as the boundaries of Hong Kong is, you've got millions of people that have grown up in a completely different environment. And now all of a sudden, you've got them thrust head to head with somebody who doesn't understand any of those values. And Hong Kongers don't understand any of the values of the Chinese Communist Party. And I was trying to figure out why anybody in the world thought that this wasn't going to happen, or it wasn't going to be as bad as it is. And all I can really say here is that I have to side with the Hong Kongers, because if you were to wake up one day in your bed in the United States or Australia or any of the Western countries that promote quote unquote democracy, and then all of a sudden all of that's taken away from you, well, you don't have a whole lot to lose. And these guys are in this beautiful city that's been built up by their own hands for 100 years. And then all of a sudden it's this. So this was one of the reasons why my first question was, are the protests dying down? Because while I don't want to see anyone hurt, that's going to end up happening. But I also don't want to see them just give up, because if they just give up, it doesn't, I don't know, the message to the rest of the world is like, yeah, you can oppress anybody you want as long as you're stronger than them for longer than them. And that just sucks, man.
Very much share those views, especially if you consider how much China has been like changing over those 100 years, and how much the Communist Party has been forcing these people to change and has been erasing its own culture, and how this culture has been preserved in Hong Kong, and how people in Hong Kong have been able to preserve not only their values, but also their like traditions, right? Their beliefs, their historical documents, and people don't want to give that up. Like, people have been growing up and seeing hearing their parents grow up in a place that allowed these traditions to be upheld, allowed people to like have a say in their own way of life, and just taking that away from people is going to be very hard. And as long as Hong Kong, like to close this argument and this explanation, like as long as Hong Kong is kicking, as long as Hong Kongers are fighting for their way of life and their history, their traditions, their language, Hong Kong is very much alive, and Hong Kong is very much like worth a place being in.
All right, I like that. So pound that like button, everybody. These guys are linked to below, their Twitter, where all the stuff that we talk about is going to be linked to below. Check it out.